Because yesterday we saw in the White House the President of the United States sitting with the President of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, and they were discussing the return of Kilmar Garcia. He's a Maryland father who was had protective custody or protective status here in the United States of America. The Supreme Court ruled that he was mistakenly deported to a slave penitentiary in El Salvador. If you wonder what I'm talking about, look up the El Salvador prison. It literally holds tens of thousands of people in near slavery conditions. I should also mention that while we are talking about the slave prison in El Salvador that we're sending people to without due process and without even committing a crime, 90% of the people who have been deported to this prison from America have been convicted of no criminal offense. They are simply accused of being part of various gangs or groups based on tattoos, based on association. One guy was picked up because he had a Chicago Bulls hat on, and they said the Chicago Bulls hat on Latino. That constitutes a sign of being part of one of these gangs that they say are so dangerous that we have to send them to this slave camp in El Salvador. Other migrants, of course, are being sent to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where we've kept terrorists from Al Qaeda for the last 25 years. That is now where we are sending people who have been convicted of nothing and whose only crime was entering the country because of a broken immigration system. That's just where we are at currently. And the Supreme Court said upon that you can't do that, particularly in this case of Kilmar. They said that the United States needed to put in place some method by which to return this man to the United States of America. That was not a suggestion. That was not a hint. That was not a multiple choice question. That was an edict from the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, the highest court in the United States, constitutionally given the power to review decisions of the executive ever since Marbury versus Madison. At the inception of our republic, that has been the role of the court, to counterbalance the executive and the legislative branch and to truly give us the types of checks and balances necessary to stop us from being an autocracy, to stop us from being a dictatorship. And that all ended yesterday. Because in the White House, when asked the question, would they be returning Kilmar to the United States that the Supreme Court ordered, mandated, they said no. The president of El Salvador, sitting there with Trump laughing, said, well, no, I can't send you a terrorist, because now they've just decided to call him a terrorist, back to America, and you can't make me. And then Trump chimes in and says, hey, what am I going to do? I can't make him send him back. And that is the moment that the republic fell. That is the moment that we can no longer call ourselves a democracy. That is the moment where we have to prepare for what is on the other side of the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell popularized this conceptualization of the tipping point, where things build up, they build up, they build up, and then suddenly you have this one kairos moment that changes everything going forward. T.S. Eliot once said, day to day, nothing changes, but looking back, nothing is the same. And after that yesterday, nothing is the same in our democratic society. Nothing is the same in our republic. Because the President of the United States looked at the Supreme Court and said no. And there's nothing he can do about it. And guess what? He is correct. There is nothing the Supreme Court can do about it. One of the founders of the court, Supreme Court Justice John Jay, wrote extensively in the Federalist Papers prior to the founding of the Republic, himself and Hamilton, Madison, etc. But he talked about the institutional integrity of the court, because the court has no troops. They have no marshals. They have no sheriffs. They cannot enforce their edicts and their decisions. The only thing that holds the legitimacy of the court in place is the acquiescence of the other branches of government and the agreement that the rule of law is greater than the rule of men. President Trump, for the first time, perhaps, in 250 years, asked the question, can you make me do it? And the answer is no. I combed a little bit through history last night, and the only other time that I saw that this happened was when Andrew Jackson wanted to break treaties and deport the Native Americans from right down here in Georgia, the Cherokees, etc. The Supreme Court said no, and Andrew Jackson said, well, make me. And that's what began the Trail of Tears, where millions of people were displaced, hundreds of thousands died, because a rogue president who did not respect the institutions of government, did not respect the Constitution, decided that his agenda was more important than our democratic system. And that's what we saw yesterday. And that tipping point with Andrew Jackson within 20 years led to the Civil War. And the tipping point that we're at currently puts us in a place of a new world order internationally. Because President Trump now has the authority that with no criminal conviction, no trial, no due process, he can essentially pick up anybody in the country, send you to a slave plantation in El Salvador, send you to Guantanamo Bay, not provide legal representation, and even if you get legal representation at home, there's no court that can force him to bring you back. That is a power which has never been invested in the executive. That is a power which the founders never intended for the president to have. That is a power that Vladimir Putin holds to disappear people. That's a power that President Xi holds in China to simply make political rivals or dissidents evaporate into thin air. To create a culture of fear where individuals believe that at any point in time dissent from the government will not end with you being arrested for trespassing. It won't end with you being shunned socially. It can end with you mysteriously disappearing from the country, never to be seen or heard from again. That is the new reality. And even if you believe Trump to be benevolent, if you think, oh no, he would never do that. He is the one who's going to make America great again. What about the president after him and after that? Because it's not about the instant moment. It's about posterity. And let's say in 20 years, there's a president that you are not so fond of. And now they have the power unilaterally to pick up any person in the country and ship them off to anywhere in the world. And then with the agreement of the dictator there, and make it clear, Bukele is a dictator. He won his last election with 84% of the vote. Vladimir Putin won his last election with 88% of the vote. He is a dictator. And that is who President Trump sided with yesterday over the will of the Supreme Court and over the will of the people. So when we talk about winter in America, when we talk about the falling of a democracy, as they say, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. We saw our democracy fall, and we didn't even fight for it. We'll be back after break on 447-226-1380 News and Talk 1380 WAOK.